Welcome back to 28storms.com on this Sunday, August 28th. We hope that you've taken advantage of all of the 28 Storms Hurricane Irene coverage. We've been at this for at least a good week now, probably beyond that, because we've covered this system ever since it exited the coast of Africa, and it finished off as we were chasing in North Carolina with live streaming coverage. So hopefully you had a chance to take a good look at that. And we've also uploaded some Hurricane Irene footage to our YouTube account in case you're interested. But now the storm is beginning to move away from the northeast, and hopefully everyone can at least get back to normal somewhat over the next 48 hours, including us over here at 28 Storms, as we begin to look more into the Atlantic Basin for our next big hurricane threat. This is the latest graphical tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center. As we can see, Irene has been downgraded to a tropical storm as it begins to move away from the northeast. It still has a few more hours to go of extreme impacts there, and we now have Tropical Storm Jose located just to the west of Bermuda, but it's really no threat to the island and will be diminishing over the northwest Atlantic within the next 48 hours. And we also have a third tropical system. This is a disturbance being given a 10% chance of tropical development. However, we're really not expecting much in the way of tropical cyclone formation from that one, and it's no threat to the United States. But here we are. This is probably the most interesting feature in the deep Atlantic today. This is Invest 92L. The Hurricane Center is closely monitoring this for development, and it very well could become the next tropical storm of the 2011 hurricane season. It is being given a 70% chance of doing so within the next 48 hours. This is the latest track forecast for Tropical Storm Irene, and the Hurricane Center has this well into southeast Canada by tomorrow afternoon, and that is in solid agreement with the latest forecast model guidance. So this storm will be quickly moving away from the U.S., and we will now have the opportunity to pick up the pieces. And hopefully this storm wasn't quite as damaging as we all thought it would be several days ago, but I'm sure that portions along the East Coast, especially the Outer Banks of North Carolina, still have some major damage to clean up from, and hopefully this can all be rectified fairly soon. This is the most recent satellite image, and fortunately much of the rainfall has ended across much of the lower half of the Northeast. However, we still have tropical storm force winds impacting much of the region. The Hurricane Center still has tropical storm warnings in effect for much of the coastal communities. However, they will more than likely be dropped within the next 6 to 12 hours. This is a quick look at Tropical Storm Jose. Maximum sustained winds are only 45 miles per hour. It's moving off toward the north at 17 miles per hour, so it's moving away from Bermuda. Bermuda is still under a tropical storm warning. However, I really don't expect anything major there, and the storm will gradually diminish and will more than likely weaken below tropical depression status within the next 24 hours. Here's the latest forecast model guidance. No land masses will be impacted. Some of the tropical models do take this up toward the Atlantic Canada region. However, once again, the storm will more than likely have dissipated by the time it reaches you. A quick look at the latest infrared shows that Bermuda really isn't even getting much in the way of any shower activity. Much of the convection is displaced well to the south of the island, well to the west of the island, and it's also exposed to the south of the low-level circulation, which is located along the northernmost extent of the convection that you see on this satellite graphic. So if we turn our attention to the remainder of the Atlantic Basin, we see that the Gulf, Caribbean, and Southwest Atlantic do have isolated shower and thunderstorm activity today, but nothing is really organizing. If we take a look at the latest infrared, we see that much of the convection is located to the southwest of Bermuda. In fact, it's to the south of Tropical Storm Jose, and this will be an area to keep an eye on. However, none of the model guidance really does anything in this area, and also the wind shear values really aren't all that impressive. It's really not that favorable for tropical development anywhere close to the southwest Atlantic. So we will continue to monitor that, but we're really not expecting any tropical development. But the tropics do become a bit more interesting in the eastern Atlantic. The initial tropical disturbance is located to the northwest of the Cape Verde Islands. We still see an exposed low-level circulation, but that convection is displaced well to the northeast, and even if that did develop, it will more than likely head out to sea, as it's already very far north. I have much greater interest in Invest 92L located to the south of the Cape Verde Islands. Not only does it look a lot more organized, but it also has a slightly greater chance of impacting land, and that will be the highlight of what we look at in today's model guidance. But first off, this is a quick look at the 850 millibar vorticity analysis. We can see that 92L Invest is already beginning to enter the picture, and we have a fairly well-defined vorticity max here. If we look at the most recent wind shear analysis, we see that much of the eastern and central Atlantic are at least marginally favorable for development, if not supportive for pretty significant tropical cyclogenesis over an extended period of time. We have a lot of mid to upper level ridging across much of the deep tropical Atlantic, and you can see that a little bit better on the color representation. We see that there are a lot of westerly winds here to the north, but as long as this tropical system were to remain down toward the south, here is that pocket of very favorable upper level conditions right above it. So the upper level wind shear is prime for our next tropical cyclone formation, but perhaps the one and potentially greatest inhibitor for development could be all of this dry air that we still see across much of the deep tropical Atlantic, as you can see by these very dark colors out ahead of our tropical system. But the one possible thing that could allow the storm to develop despite that is sea surface temperatures, especially down south here, are generally favorable. We're looking at about 27 to 28 degrees Celsius where the storm is currently located, and the water temperatures only get warmer as the system moves more toward the west or west-northwest. So these favorable water temperatures could allow the storm to generate its own convection despite the dry air being located in its immediate vicinity. We'll start off today with the 12Z CMC forecast model, and it's developing 92L Invest into a rather significant hurricane by the day 5 to day 6 time period. However, the one good thing is that the model is taking the system well to the north and east of the Lesser Antilles, but keep in mind that this is an extended 5 to 8 day forecast, so there is still plenty of time for this to change. But as of right now, the current thinking from the CMC model is that the Atlantic subtropical ridge will temporarily be a little bit weaker than normal over the central Atlantic, and that's partially in response to Hurricane Irene, who will be still recurving over the next 72 hours along the western extent of that ridge. The latest 12Z run of the GFS forecast model also shows the same general pattern. It develops 92L into a rather robust tropical cyclone as early as within the next 72 hours, and as we go into the 5 to 7 day period, we begin to see a little bit more of a poleward motion. And if I stop this at the day 7 time forecast, we see that the system is still located well out to the east here in the central Atlantic, so once again there is plenty of time for this to change. And not only do we have 92L Invest to monitor on this model, but it's also developing a second tropical system almost as quickly as it leaves the coast of Africa. So we have very active times ahead, and that should be expected as we get closer to the peak of hurricane season. And before we go into specifics regarding the 12Z ECMWF forecast run, keep in mind that, as mentioned before, we will go ahead and continue watching the western Atlantic as the models do show some mischief there, but nothing overly organized. And as we go 24, 48, and 72 hours into the future, much like the CMC and European models, we have a developing tropical cyclone here. So this will be our next storm. And it's even trying to develop a weak low here in the western Gulf of Mexico. We'll keep an eye on that, but so far that's the only model really doing so. And then as we go into day 4, here's that weak low going into Mexico at 1009 millibars. We have this developing storm more than likely becoming a hurricane as we go into day 4 and day 5. And also notice the model is trying to develop some type of low pressure here near Bermuda, possibly subtropical in nature. And as we go into day 6 and 7, that little low feature begins to lift toward the northeast into Canada. And in the meantime, we have a developing hurricane well to the northeast of the Lesser Antilles. But once again, keep an eye on this. This is a 7 to 8 day forecast, and we saw just how much the model shifted with Hurricane Irene. They were taking this across much of the greater Antilles and eventually ending up in the central Gulf of Mexico, and we know how that played out. The storm is currently going to be moving over Maine, so lots of time for this to change. So that sums up your tropical weather update for this Sunday afternoon. In the meantime, you can go ahead and email us any feedback that you may have regarding our Hurricane Irene coverage. We support any type of comments or criticism so that we can make these updates better for everyone. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and take another nap as I recover from the 72-hour storm chase regarding Hurricane Irene as I went from Alabama to the coastal Carolinas. So it's been a long few days, but it was very fun, and I was just glad that we were able to provide some assistance to some people, along with continue the updates on the website as much as we possibly could while still on the road. So thanks again for visiting 28storms.com. We will have more updates throughout the remainder of the hurricane season, and we will take a closer look at Invest 92L, as that does appear to be our next storm to keep a very close watch on. So thanks again for visiting, and have a good evening.